Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, page 15, Daf Tet Vav. Starting on the bottom of 14b, for context, we started the Gemara. We finished the Mishnah, we started the Gemara. Rabbi Lazar says the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis applies only to a case where one loaf became ritually impure before the sprinkling of the blood of the lambs, as this is the act that renders the loaves permitted for consumption. Accordingly, they disagree whether the sprinkling is effective in permitting the remaining pure loaf for consumption. But in a case where one loaf was rendered impure after the sprinkling, meaning that both loaves were initially permitted for consumption, everyone agrees that the impure one remains in its state of impurity, and the pure one shall be eaten. And the Gemara asks, in the case where the loaves became impure before the sprinkling of the blood, with regard to what principle do they disagree? Rav Papa said they disagree with regard to the front plate of the high priest, meaning whether it affects acceptance only for the impurity of items sacrificed on the altar, or even for the impurity of items that would normally be consumed by the priests. And that brings us now to 15a on the top, our daily daf, with the words Rabbanan Savri. Rabbanan Savri, the rabbis hold that the front plate affects acceptance for items that are normally consumed by the priests but have become ritually impure. Consequently, the sprinkling of the blood in this case is entirely valid act that is capable of rendering the remaining pure loaf permitted for consumption. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that the front plate does not affect acceptance for items that are consumed by the priests and have become impure. Accordingly, the sprinkling of the blood is ineffective in rendering the remaining pure loaf permitted for consumption. Amar le Rav Huna b'rei de Rav Nasan le Rav Papa. Amar Rav Huna b'rei de Rav Nasan le Rav Papa. V'ha olin he'etzitz b'ratze ein olim mefnigi. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nasan, says, Republic, can this be the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis? But what about items that normally ascend upon the altar? Even Rabbi Yehuda concedes that the front plate affects acceptance for impure items that normally ascend the altar, and Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis nevertheless disagree with regard to the remaining item in a case of this kind. Detanya nitma echad min habazichin Rabbi Yehuda amer shneim yasu betuma lefnei she'ein korban tzibur chaluk v'chachamim omrim atamim betuma savetvar v'tahara osori. The Gemara provides the source for this claim, as it is taught in a Braita. If one of the bowls of frankincense accompanying the showbread, which are meant to be burned upon the altar, become impure, Rabbi Yehuda says that the rites of both of them may be performed in impurity. In other words, the priest may even render the second bowl impure and burn both of them together, as no communal offering is divided. And the mitzvah to sacrifice communal offerings overrides the prohibition against rendering them impure. And the rabbis say the impure one remains in its state of impurity, and the pure one remains in its state of purity. Evidently, their dispute does not depend on whether the front plate affects acceptance. And furthermore, Amar Ravashi Tashima Rabbi Yehuda Amel Afilu shevet echad tameh v'chol hashvatim ta'irin yasu b'tumah lefnei she'ein korbanos korban tzibur chaluk v'hacha ma'hitzitz b'ratzikom. And furthermore, Ravashi said, come in here an additional proof that the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis does not concern the front plate, as we learned in a Mishnah Sachem 80a, with regard to the consumption of the paschal offering in a state of impurity. And Rabbi Yehuda says, even if one tribe is ritually impure and all the rest of the tribes are pure, all the tribes may perform the rite of the Paschal offering in a state of impurity, as no communal offerings are divided. Rav Ashi explains, but here, what relevance is there to the question of whether the front plate affects acceptance? The front plate affects acceptance for offerings that have become impure, but it does not render it permitted for one who is ritually impure to sacrifice an offering. And furthermore, Amar Ravina, Tashema nitmaas achas menachalos o echad minasidorin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shnein Yitzu lebeis hascheipa v'pi shein korban zimu chaluk v'chachamim oimrim v'atamim b'tumos yochel. And furthermore, doesn't Ravina say, come and hear a proof, that the matter of the front plate cannot be the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, as the Mishnah teaches, if one of the two loaves brought on Shavuot or one of the two arrangements of showbread become ritually impure, Rabbi Yehuda says both must be taken to the place of burning, as no communal offering is divided. And the rabbis say the impure one remains in its impurity, and the pure one may be eaten. The Gemara explains the difficulty, and if it is so, meaning that the dispute between them concerns the front plate, then Rabbi Yehuda should have said they are both burned, because the front plate does not affect acceptance for impure items that are consumed by the priests. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says it is a settled tradition in the mouth of Rabbi Yehuda that no communal offering is divided, and if one part of an offering becomes impure, the entire offering is disqualified. That's it for the Talmud, and now we start the new Mishnah. Zog the Heilige Mishnah, Hatoid Mifageles is Halech Velech Ve'in Mifageles Hatoido. Ketzad Shachad is Hatoido. Lechol Mimena Lemocho, Hiva Lechem Mifugalin. Lechol Mena Lechem Lemocho, Halem Mifugal Vatoida in Mifugeles. The Mishnah says that the thanks offering renders the accompanying loaves pigul, but the loaves do not render the thanks offering pigul. How so? If one slaughtered the thanks offering, which may be consumed only during the day, it is slaughtered and the night thereafter, with the intent to partake of it the next day, the offering and the accompanying loaves are rendered pigul. If he slaughtered it with the intent to partake of the loaves the next day, the loaves are rendered pigul, and the thanks offering is not pigul. Likewise, the lamb sacrificed with the two loaves likewise, the lambs sacrificed with the 2 loaves meal offering on Shavuot render the accompanying loaves pigul, but the loaves do not render the lambs pigul. How so? If one slaughtered the lambs, which may be consumed only during the day, they are slaughtered and the night thereafter with the intent to partake of them the next day. The lambs and the accompanying loaves are rendered pigul. If he did so with the intent to partake for the loaves the next day, the loaves are rendered pigul, and the lambs are not pigul. That's the Mishnah. Now for the Talmud. Zog the Talmud. My Tamili Mishum Rav Kahana, Demon Kahana, Menayin Lach Mehatoida, Shnikrotoida, Shine'emal, Vikrival, Zebachatoida Chalois. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that a thanks offering renders its accompanying loaves pigul? If we say that it is due to that which Rav Kahana says, this is problematic. As Rav Kahana says, from where is it derived that the loaves of a thanks offering are themselves called a thanks offering? It is derived from that which is stated in the verse, then he shall offer with the. sacrifice of thanks, offering loaves. Leviticus 7:12. The juxtaposition of the words thanks offering and loaves indicates that the loaves are themselves called a thanks offering. Ihachi ipchanami halokashia lechem ikri toda lo ikri lechem. The Gemara explains why the halacha of the Mishnah cannot be derived from Rav Kahana's exposition. If so, then the opposite should be the halacha as well. That intent of pigul with regard to the loaves should likewise render the thanks offering pigul. The Gemara rejects this suggestion. This is not difficult, as the loaves are called a thanks offering, but a thanks offering is not called loaves. Toida, vein toida gilal, lechem. Lechem gilal kevasim. Vein kevasim gilal lechem. But the Gemara asks, but with regard to that which the Mishnah teaches, the lamb sacrificed with the 2 loaves, meal offering on Shavuot render the accompanying loaves pigul, but the loaves do not render the lambs pigul. Where do we find that the 2 loaves are called lambs? Rather, is it not correct that this is the reason why the thanks offering renders the loaves pigul, but not vice versa? The bread is brought on account of the thanks offering, but the thanks offering is not brought on account of the bread. In other words, the thanks offering is the primary element of the sacrifice. Similarly, the 2 loaves of bread are brought on account of the lambs, and the lambs are not brought on account of the bread. Utzrichi, and the Gemara notes that both of these halachas are necessary. The Gemara said both these cases are necessary, as had the Mishnah taught us halacha only in the case of the thanks offering, the one might say it is only there with regard to thanks offering that when one renders the loaves pigul, the thanks offering is not rendered pigul because they were not bound to one another by waving. In other words, the mitzvah of the waving, the thanks offering may be fulfilled without the bread. But with regard to lambs, which the 2 items were bound to one another by waving, and 2 loaves are waved together with the lambs, one might say that when he renders the bread pigul, the lambs should be rendered pigul as well. Therefore, it was necessary for the Mishnah to teach the halacha also with regard to the case of the lambs. Okay, nice. Boy, we need a little so, I show you the toida. Lechol kezayis mimena. Umilach manamacho mahu leipagole. Tode lo biboeli. Hashtekule milachma. Lo mipagli. Mimena milachma miboi. Rabbi Elazar raised a dilemma before Rav. If one slaughters the thanks offering with the intent to consume an olive bulb from it and from its loaves the next day, what is the halakha? Rabbi Elazar elaborates, I do not raise the dilemma with regard to rendering the thanks offering pigul for the following reason. Now, in a case where his intent was to consume the entire olive bulb from its loaves alone, the thanks offering is not rendered pigul, in accordance with the Mishnah's ruling that pigul intent with regard to loaves does not render the thanks offering pigul. Then in a case where his intent is to consume half an olive bulb from the thanks offering and half an olive bulb from its loaves, in which case the offering is rendered pigul only if the 2 intentions of less than a full measure are combined. It is necessary to teach that the thanks offering is not pigul. Ki kami boyeli lepagli lechem mi mitzalfa toda lipagole lechem ulo. Rather, when I raise the dilemma, it is with regard to rendering the loaves pigul, which can be rendered pigul by intent concerning the loaves alone. In this case, does the intention of the priest with regard to the thanks offering combine with his intention concerning the loaves to render the loaves pigul or not? Amar le af bizo halechem mifugal v'yato de'in mifugeles v'amai le'mekal b'chomer u'mato de'mipagel ein mipagel aber mipagel mipigel ein adin shlo yisrael. Rav said to Rabbi Elazar, even in this case, the loaves are rendered pigul, and the thanks offering is not rendered pigul. The Gemara asks, but why should the loaves be rendered pigul? Let us say the following, Kal v'chomer. And if the thanks offering, which in this case serves to render the loaves pigul, is itself not rendered pigul, then the loaves which come to render the thanks offering pigul, but do not render it pigul, as the intent to consume a half an olive bulk from the loaves does not combine with the intent to consume half an olive bulk from the thanks offering to render the thanks offering pigul. Is it not logical that the loaves themselves should not be rendered pigul? Okay, and then the Gemara asks on this, "Mi amrin kal v'chomer ki hagavna yatanya." Okay, so the Gemara wants to basically just kind of intercept this thing by saying, do we ask a Kal v'chomer in this way? And the Gemara is going to say, but isn't it taught in a Braita that there was an incident involving one, and it's going to attempt to show how I'm guessing right now, can't use a Kal v'chomer from that. Okay, that's 15a of Menachot.